This video is going to be an attempt at finding out the ideal composition of Earth's atmosphere, notably by volume in this case, but look it up any way you want to. 99.964% of the atmosphere is accounted for by three basic gases: 98.084% nitrogen, 20.946% oxygen, and 0.093% argon as of 1987 measurements. The rest are trace gases as of 2019 measurement, as well as 2009 measurements. Carbon dioxide listing as of 2009, 0.0407% carbon dioxide, 0.001818% neon gases of 1987, 0.00018% methane 2009, and 0.000524% helium as of 1987. Now, you might have noticed those are a decreasing importance. People bringing up in comment sections on the internet and fixating on methane because they like making a joke and ignoring neon gases, neon and other gases. Also seem to ignore that the most common greenhouse gas in the atmosphere is water vapor. It's seasonal and it can be measured pretty easily, but we're talking about static effects over time that can be traced. 1800 to 1980 or 1980 to 2019. What was the increase and steady rise for the up to 250% of a gas? It was methane. It stalled in the 1990s and went up again. Now, methane is an even tinier effect, or is it just a tinier amount of gas? Compared to carbon dioxide at 0.04%, we'll just call it that, versus 0.0002% for methane in 2009, same year. We're talking about a fairly big difference in the amount. If you want to fixate on one or the other, you have to figure out which one has the most effect. We'll move on now. Now, from 1800 to 2019, we have measurable data that shows a 45% increase in carbon dioxide. That's roughly around the period of time from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution or Industrial Age, or whatever you want to call it. So that meant that in 1800, if we assume the 45% increase and the number we got there, that would indicate that the carbon dioxide level is basically 0.03% is the normal gas level. All right? Cool. So it'd be, 3 to 4 ratio. That's about right. It's not really correct, but it's a good rounding off number. It's actually 0.02807%. Or not. Next, we go on to the next thing. 1980 to 2019, the carbon dioxide increase was 50% of what we got. So it ain't from the 1800s, it's from recently. And 25% of it was just in a period of time of 19 years from the year 2000 to 2019. This is a recent phenomenon. That's numbers and percentages. I looked up a dozen sources or more. This is one of many sources that is, if you want to critique it, I've got a link below to it. Be careful. It takes 300 years to almost 1,000 years or 1,000 years to undo these kind of changes. That's with planting, 256 trees like I tell people to do, everybody doing this, and people not contributing more crap into the atmosphere. It'd get it down to 300 years instead of 900 years. Okay? And except for seasonal water vapor and using that as an escape hatch argument, or greenhouse gases like methane, this is information that's confirmable according to the numbers I've given you from the oil companies that discovered it, from Republican-led research efforts that were double-blinded so that the Republican politicians couldn't interfere with it, and they immediately crammed it down. They were still released because the scientists involved were allowed to cite the information, but they did not like this because it interfered with them getting oil company bribes. Yes, we're at the 5-minute mark and we're done. Or, I just did a video on the impracticality and stupidity, just base numbers, of spending 7,000 to 3 million years in space using Space Force or Star Force or whatever it's going to be called next by the MAGA crowd, to go to the nearest Earth version 2 because you're reluctant or politically unable to, or worried about making it to your door of your house without having an accident as a politician by having let the Democrats win and let the EPA try to fix it by actually doing something. Yelling and screaming is cheap when you're getting lots of donation money through, them. And the them I'm referring to have been doing this for a while. And again, I'm citing sources that are trying to make it look like there isn't any global warming problem. The trouble is when you read the data, it is. It's a specific gas, it's carbon dioxide. There are others, but fixating on the others is a way to avoid fixating on carbon dioxide. And no, I don't want Al Gore winning with carbon credits. Let's move on. 500 BC, 100 million people were on the Earth. There were 500 million people living by 1680. That's 0.4 billion more. That took 1,650 years since 500 BC to go up 0.4 billion. Now, comparing that again, by 1700, we had 600 million people living. That was 500 million in 1,750 years. That means that every billion people would take 3,500 years to happen. That kind of expansion was restricted by a bunch of restrictions we had as a species on ourselves, mostly caused by the environment and our inability to do major changes to the world. 1760 to 1840, the industrial age began. 1760, there was 0.77 billion people on Earth. By 1804, it was 1 billion. A half billion more in the 204 years since 1600. 500 million in 204 years meant that it was a billion people every 400 years instead of a billion people every 3,000. Population growth is accelerating. 1850, 1.2 billion people. 1900, 1.6 billion people. 2 billion people by 1927. A billion more in 122 years since 1804. That means it was a billion people in 122 years instead of a billion people in 200 years. And before that, it was a billion people every 3,500 years. The population is escalating because the population is getting bigger, and that's happening. 1953 to 1958, the population increase yearly was almost 2% or hovering around it. 1960, 3 billion people lived. That's another billion in 33 years since 1927. Instead of taking 3,000 years or 200 years or 400 years or 122 years, it took only 33 years to add another billion people to the population. 1962 to 1974, again another almost 2% per year increase in the population. From 1975, we had 4 billion people. That was 15 years for a billion people. The next series is 10 years for a billion people, then 13 years for a billion people, then 12 years for a billion people, and then 12 years for a billion people. Every 10 to 15 years, another billion people get thrown into the pile. But don't ever consider understanding that human beings need a place to live. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps while you sit in your mom and dad's money bought house and lifestyle that you were born into. Period, full stop. 90% of the people who don't have to worry about something, you eventually trace it back. They got help from their relatives, which is fine. But you're trying to apply a demand to people who can't achieve something that you didn't achieve either. Next. The reason for the population increase was the industrial age starting, which is great and everything. We have a lot of things we like from it. a lot of you are longing for by yelling loudly about getting off grid, putting back the clock, starting over, as an almost escape hatch way of avoiding problems. Do you know why Space Force was made? Which will eventually be called Star Force. Yes, I saw that as a meme today. Don't ask. Please don't look it up. You might cry. Because there are a bunch of conservatives that hate NASA, because NASA is Star Force. NASA and the U.S. Air Force are Star Force. They're the organization that does, Space Force, that does space exploration. But no, it has to be Space Force because Trump and MAGA. These are also the same people who idolize, or attempt to now, Elon Musk and people like him who want to, rugged individualism, but only if you're obscenely rich and are absolutely guilty of some really horrible things that you did to get to the top. Oh, that's okay. People will get over it, and other excuses pile on. Versus admitting that you need to let scientists tell you what's going on instead of arguing with them, like George Santos trying to argue something, or some other idiot saying windmills cause wind. Wind turbines cause the wind. And we listen to the stupidity and just kind of blink and go, okay, that's absolutely ludicrous. That's Idiocracy, the movie. 7,000 years minimum to get to the next planet. I did a video on why the speed limit we have to deal with is based on trying to emulate the speed of a comet and failing, but getting close enough to be able to do something like it when literally shooting something at the sun and we can just barely get up to a similar speed, much less powered spaceflight to the next planet, the star system it's in, that sort of thing, that we could be habitable about. Oh, what about Mars? If you're not aware of it, Mars is not terraformable, as far as we can tell, and we have actual data from it. We have less information about Venus, but it actually has the components in it that if it could be moved out of orbit, it'd almost be easier to find a way to move it out of orbit. It could become an Earth too. It could, in fact, become Nemesis on the opposite side of our star. And it would eventually cool down and become habitable, maybe. Or just stop fucking the planet up and try to make it fix itself. Mild shock. Yeah, actually dealing with the problem instead of fantasizing away our responsibility as a species to not kill ourselves. Or you can just keep talking about how some of the buoys in the ocean were rigged by some evil conglomerate, but totally not the oil companies. It had to be somebody selling carbon credits before that became an actual thing, like literally 40 years before it became a thing. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And there isn't any Earth 2. And if you are dealing with a relative that keeps sticking their head up their ass, especially if they idolize Space Force or something, or now Star Force is trending, I hope it doesn't trend by the time you see this video. Make them do the math. But yeah, let's get it done in 300 years instead of 1,000, because we may not be able to do it at all if we wait that long.